There is a moment in the book of Esther that is so familiar to us, we tend to gloss over it without really paying attention. It comes right after Haman, thank you for not making the noise, is infuriated by Mordecai's failure to bow down to him, and he decides that the Jews must be destroyed. He goes to the king and says, "There is a certain people, scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them." In one verse, the Hebrew Bible sums up 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. I wonder, how on earth did the authors of the book of Esther know that for centuries to come, the Jewish people would be maligned as a scattered, insidious force working to destroy civilization? How did they know that we would be slandered and persecuted for the invented crime of disloyalty to the nations in which we live, including our own? How did they guess that villain after villain like Haman would rise against us, seeking our destruction, all the while applauding themselves for their self-righteousness? How did they know? In our time, the incidents of anti-Semitism are almost too numerous to count and far too many to ignore. Shootings at the Tree of Life and Poway Chabad synagogues, the neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville, a 29-year-old man punched, kicked, and pepper-sprayed in Times Square, 5 Jews attacked in Los Angeles by people waving Palestinian flags, countless college students attacked verbally and physically and prevented from attending classes or moving freely about their campuses. Jewish institutions vandalized, including one in Austin, synagogues receiving threatening phone calls, bomb threats, and swatting, Jews of all ages harassed on social media. Every day, I receive an update from Secure Community Network, an organization that has partnered with all the major Jewish movements to provide security information and training, and I read about incidents of anti-Semitism throughout the United States and around the world. Consider these examples. At the University of Vermont, a teaching assistant made anti-Semitic remarks on social media, threatening to lower the grades of Jewish students. When 2 student organizations boasted that they would exclude students who expressed support for Zionism from membership in their organizations, UVM's president released a statement denying that anti-Semitism is an issue at the university. In Boston, a Democratic City Council member tweeted, "Y'all are letting the Zionists shake you down," in response to a federal court ruling allowing a new law against boycotting Israel to go into effect. A kosher pizza restaurant in the Upper East Side of Manhattan had a brick thrown through its window, as did the Jewish-owned hardware store next door. Similar violent attacks on Jews are taking place not just here in America, but in Europe and around the world, as anti-Semites seem emboldened in their brazenness and lack of fear of repercussions for blatant attacks on Jews. In addition to the physical attacks, social media has become a platform for amplifying and multiplying hateful, vicious invective against Jews and Israel. People who express support for Israel are bullied, intimidated, and silenced, all because Israel has the chutzpah to defend itself against Hamas and Hezbollah. No wonder Jews are reluctant to post Jewish information on social media. No wonder we are afraid, once again, to show outward signs of faith. No wonder we've shied away from publicly discussing our faith for fear of reprisal. This is a sad state of affairs. Anti-Semitism might be called the oldest hatred, but to my deep sadness and dismay, it is also a current event. According to a study done by the Anti-Defamation League, there was a 140% increase in anti-Semitic activity from 2022 to 2023, and a 360% increase since October 7th of last year. The number of incidents over the past year is the highest count since the ADL, began keeping statistics in the 1970s. There is a part of me that is surprised and asks incredulously, even here in America? And another part of me responds wearily, yes, here in America. American democracy and religious freedom have been a gift to the Jewish people, allowing us to thrive here as we have nowhere else in the history of our diaspora. And yet, we know a more troubling legacy. Here in America, where Father Charles Coughlin spewed Jew hatred on his 1930s radio show to 30 million weekly listeners. Here in America, where aviation hero Charles Lindbergh spoke at a rally of the isolationist American First Committee in 1941. Here in America, where Henry Ford's anti-Semitic writings received the highest praise from Adolf Hitler. And here in America, where former President Trump has said that Jews who vote for Democratic candidates are being disloyal to the Jewish people and very disloyal to Israel. That Jews are only in it for themselves and stick together in an ethnic allegiance that exceeds all other loyalties. That if his opponent wins in November, Israel will likely cease to exist within 2 years. And that if he loses the election, Jews will be to blame. But wait, the first part of me says. Just because there is Jew hatred in our past doesn't mean it's in our societal DNA. That was then, this is now. And then that other weary part of me says one word, Charlottesville. White supremacists, the Klan in khakis, chants of Jews will not replace us, armed extremists gathered outside the Reform synagogue in Charlottesville while the Jews prayed inside. And that part of me also says, October 8th, when hundreds, if not thousands, of mainstream Americans publicly celebrated the massacre of 1,200 Israelis. And that number has only grown larger and more virulent in our cities and on our college campuses. In the 21st century, here in America, racism and anti-Semitism marching in lockstep in Charlottesville and in anti-Israel protests remind us of the truth we learn and forget, and now in 2024, learn again. Anti-Semitism flourishes in any hothouse of intolerance and grows robustly alongside other hatreds, whether those hatreds seem directed toward us as Jews or not. So what exactly is this phenomenon we call anti-Semitism? The term itself was popularized in 19th century Germany by Wilhelm Marr, who sought to racialize the hatred of Jews beyond its religious roots. Sociologist Helen Fine defined it as a persisting latent structure of hostile beliefs towards Jews as a collectivity. We use the word to refer to Jew hatred in all its forms, from a swastika defacing a school or business to internet screeds about Jews controlling the global economy, from the religiously motivated anti-Judaism of the ancient and medieval church, which saw Jews as the source of ultimate evil for their rejection of Christianity, to the 19th century racial theories, which saw Jews as corrupting the purity of the white race and eventually gave rise to Nazism, to the political uses of anti-Semitism today by left and right alike. Ambassador Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, posits that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, an unlikely or bizarre explanation of events that depends on belief in sinister, powerful groups. Conspiracy theories gain traction not because of evidence or arguments, but because of the desire to blame circumstances on a hated group that is defined as evil. Anti-Semitism is deviously flexible in its form. New York Times columnist Barry Weiss calls it an ever-morphing conspiracy theory in which Jews play the starring role in spreading evil in the world. In the eyes of the anti-Semite, she writes, the Jew is whatever the anti-Semite needs him to be, the symbol of whatever a given civilization defines as its most sinister and threatening qualities. Think about it. In the Middle Ages, Jews were accused of killing Gentile babies to drink their blood. Today, anti-Semites spread stories of a Jewish conspiracy to replace the white race by promoting the immigration of black and brown people into the United States. They tell stories of Jews not showing up to work at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, which proves that the attack was secretly a Jewish plot. When we actually inspect the underlying beliefs of anti-Semitism, all we see is delusional thinking. We see beliefs so absurd and without a shred of evidence that could only be the product of hatred run amok. We easily understand that such conspiracy theories are the product of paranoia and irrational rage. They have nothing to do with history, theology, socioeconomic or geopolitical trends, policies, or facts. Conspiracy theories do not need reasons. Hatred has no logic. The unsettling idea that there is no why behind anti-Semitism presents a big problem for people who want to combat it. If there is no rational basis for anti-Semitism, there is no reason to believe that any amount of facts or arguments will undo it. Anti-Semites believe that Jews are greedy, evil, inferior, or plotting to overthrow civilization because that is what they believe. They may present so-called evidence in support of their beliefs, but debunking false evidence does not stop them from hating, since their hatred was never actually based in facts or evidence to begin with. Does this all sound familiar? In many ways, we are living in an era of conspiracy theories. So what do? How do you stop a hatred that is based on nothing? We need to understand that anti-Semitism is not a sideshow to racism, as much as it is the fuel that white nationalism uses to power its contempt for people of color, its xenophobia, its misogyny, and all other forms of hatred it holds dear. Author Joe Glanville writes, "Anti-Semitism never goes out of fashion. It adapts endlessly to the anxieties of the age. Pandemic, Jews are behind it. Immigration, Jews are orchestrating it. Terrorist atrocity, a Zionist plot." Political leaders like our former president and certain right-wing members of Congress have all perpetrated the age-old anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that only serve to give cover to and inflame those who would lash out at Jews and blame us for the problems of society. But anti-Semitism has found a home on the left as well, as we have seen as a result of the current war in Gaza. We see much of its current manifestations on college campuses, where Jewish students and professors who express support for Israel can encounter harassment, exclusion from progressive spaces and movements, and physical violence. I want to be clear. Criticism of Israel as a country, bound by the same international law as other countries, is not inherently anti-Semitic. But as Rabbi Jill Jacob teaches, it is anti-Semitic to equate Jews or Jewish institutions with the state of Israel, or to take out anger about Israel's actions against Jews or Jewish institutions, or to apply to Israel a standard that would not be applied to any other country, or to deny Jewish history in Israel, or to call for the expulsion of all Jews from Israel, or to demand that Jewish students on campus disavow any connection to Israel before joining progressive coalitions or taking any part in student government. As New York Times editor Emma Goldberg has written, "We Jews have lived a dual history of trauma and privilege. Yes, we have achieved and experienced a notable measure of success and status in American society. But we know too well that each success is no guarantee of protection against, and sometimes invites, forces of scapegoating and hatred. So how shall we combat anti-Semitism in the year 5785? I suggest that there are 6 important steps to combating hatred that we can all do. Number 1, speak up. No anti-Semitism should ever be ignored or go unchallenged. When a neighbor or coworker or friend makes an offhand semi-humorous remark about Jews controlling Hollywood or the banking system or what have you, reply without apology or antagonism, that's hurtful. You know, some people believe those awful stereotypes. Don't tell jokes like that. When neo-Nazis distribute anti-Semitic flyers on our driveways, or when someone does a donut across the front lawn of the church in order to mow down our congregation Shalom sign, we can't write it off as the product of a few disturbed individuals. We must, and did, report it to the police. We must go to the newspapers and TV stations and demand coverage. We must publicize the names and faces of the perpetrators of hate. If people tell us we are overreacting, we must say that we will not be silenced and that all forms of hatred must be confronted. Number 2, we must educate ourselves. We need to make sure that we ourselves understand anti-Semitism. Learning about the history and patterns of anti-Semitism will help Jews to identify it quickly and make sure that other people see it too, even in our everyday interactions. That goes for our children as well, so we will be discussing it in age-appropriate ways in Kesher. We must join forces. Anti-Semitism may be the oldest hatred, but it's surely not the only one. When we join with Blacks, Muslims, Asians, LGBTQ+ people, and others who are also subjected to hatred, we not only gain allies in our fight, we also gain opportunities to show how the anti-Semitism we face is painful and harmful to us, and how it hurts them too. We must show that we are all stronger when we support each other through both good and scary times. We do this by sharing the beauty of our traditions. We must share our sacred stories with them and then listen with open hearts as they share their sacred stories with us. As individuals and as a community, we should invite them to seders and to services and to our Shabbat dinners, and we should accept their invites to church celebrations and iftar dinners. As individuals and as a congregation, we can deepen our interfaith efforts that bring us into deep relationship and sacred action with peoples of many different faiths and backgrounds. This was the impetus behind our applying and receiving a grant from the Religious Action Center of the URJ last year to fund interfaith programming. Because when we see other people as human beings and they see us, it is much harder for us to demonize one another. Number 4, we must dig more deeply into ourselves. Jews are not exempt from our own prejudices and stereotyping. Our reflections on the experience of anti-Semitism should not wall us off from the suffering of other people. It should heighten our awareness. We should become more determined to acknowledge prejudice and bias that exists within the Jewish community. We need to notice our own tendencies to marginalize Jews of color, Jews with disabilities, transgender, and queer Jews. We should strengthen our resolve to build a community in which every voice matters. We know that such a commitment will make us better and stronger as people. Number 5, let us lean into the beauty of Judaism itself. Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, who I mentioned earlier, calls on us to live affirmatively joyous Jewish lives, to celebrate Shabbat, to honor our parents, to be concerned about the most vulnerable among us, to pursue justice with just means, and to maintain an indelible connection to the State of Israel, even when we disagree with its policies. In short, she calls upon us to build a Jewish identity based on what Jews do and not what is done to Jews. Number 6, lastly, as real and stubborn as the existence of anti-Semitism is, we need to keep it in perspective. We must acknowledge that after the shootings of Tree of Life and Poway Chabad, and after Charlottesville, and after October 7th, and after attacks in Los Angeles, in Boston, in New York, in Austin, and around the United States, The outpouring of love and sympathy and solidarity for the Jewish community was profound, with very public support coming from the general population, from politicians of all political persuasions, and from religious leaders of every faith tradition. My friends, the presence of anti-Semitism is painful and enduring. The challenge before us is to be vigilant, but not fearful, because fear will distort who we are. We can't let anti-Semitism drive us into tribal isolation, drawing the wagons into a circle, hopelessly distrustful of the world around us. As Rabbi David Stern has taught, if the targeting we experience as a minority leads us to fear and target other minorities, the anti-Semites have won. If we are only focused on fighting against our persecutors rather than fighting for our values, then the anti-Semites have won. If anti-Semitism breaks our hearts, but does not break them open to the suffering of others, then the anti-Semites have won. Because in the end, the destiny of the Jewish people does not reside in some neo-Nazi meeting, or a hateful pamphlet, or a demagogic politician, or even in an act of terror. It resides right here, in this sacred community, in our hearts and in our hands. In the face of anti-Semitism, the best answer we have is to live a proud and vibrant Jewish life. Yes, sometimes the answer to anti-Semitism needs to come in the form of added security and greater vigilance at the door. But if you consider that the goal of anti-Semites is the erosion of Jewish self-confidence, then our shared responsibility in securing the Jewish future is to bring Jews of every age into a sense of Jewish meaning, connection, and purpose. I believe anti-Semitism in our day is serious, but I recall the words of the late Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who said, "The Holocaust is our tragedy, but it is not our rationale." In other words, we are not Jews because of anti-Semitism. We are not Jews because of Hitler, or even despite him. We are Jews because of God, because of Torah, because of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, because of our commitment to justice and compassion and human dignity. We are Jews because of history and song, because of tzedakah and Shabbat and Simchat Torah, and because of the bagels and kugel and the conversations that await us at our break the fast tables after we sound the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. I've been thinking a lot in recent months about these two things. Number one, anti-Semitism is alive and well even in our beloved city of San Antonio. We must not be blind to or naive about that. We must battle it and defeat it for our own sake and for the sake of other vulnerable communities. And number two, we Jews in our time are not alone unless we choose to be. Our security team will keep us safe. Our interfaith partners will stand with us when we need them, and we'll stand with them when they need us. And our embrace of Judaism will bring depth and richness to a Jewish identity that has endured and outlived and outshined every hatred. May the Holy One of Blessing and all of God's people be there for us as we are there for them now and always. I wish for you all a new year of goodness, sweetness, blessings, health, and of joy in being Jewish. Shana Tova.